But people feel like if they don't have a lot of financial resources, especially as they get older, that they failed in some way, which of course isn't the case.
Hello and welcome to Feeling Money, where we explore where money meets real life. I'm your host, Rachel Kinney. I'm a financial therapist who is curious about the meaning and power that money has in our individual stories, in our relationships, and in our wider communities. Let's get to it. Hello, I'm here with April Harris-Jackson of Graceful Aging Legal Services, a law firm here in Nashville, Tennessee. She is the owner of Graceful Aging Legal Services, and we're so excited that she's here with us today. April, I would love to just hear a little bit about you and how you got started in this type of law.
Yeah, thanks, Rachel. So my practice focuses on estate planning, probate, and elder law. Elder law is the term that we use within the legal industry. I don't necessarily like that term, but that's what I have to say to let other lawyers know what I do. I knew that I wanted to do estate planning when I graduated law school. And that's because I had a family situation come up during my third year in law school where my grandfather passed away, and we had a really great experience with his passing. We're very fortunate he had a really good death, and I had really great last memories with him. But things went downhill from there, unfortunately. And the very first trial that I attended as a spectator, not as an attorney, but after I got licensed, was among my family fighting over my grandfather's estate. As an attorney, then I could see where things went off the rails and how I could help people do better by their own families. And so once I started practicing and doing estate planning, I signed up to serve as guardian ad litem in our local probate court for conservatorship cases, and discovered that I actually really love doing conservatorship work. Just like estate planning, you feel like you're really making a difference for these families, and conservatorships fall under that elder law category and dealing with aging and having a lot to learn. So I learned a lot in that conservatorship category and just really loved that work. So that's how I got into my practice areas. Outside of work, I am a wife to Ian. I am a very devoted dog mom, and I love trying to garden. I don't always succeed. I love buying fun stamps and buying locally made things, especially candles. More generally, I'm a white woman. I grew up in the suburbs here in Nashville in a middle-class family.
Yeah.
And I think it needs to be mentioned that I have a professional degree, obviously, and my socioeconomic status growing up comes with a fair amount of financial privilege. So as we're having that discussion, I think it bears saying that my experience is not everyone's experience, but I'm happy to be here and share it with you.
Yeah, and I think it's really important to kind of socially locate yourself for this conversation. But it sounds like you had a really important and meaningful personal experience that really showed you how much people need help around families and money and planning. Could you just tell us, for somebody who might not know, what conservatorship means?
Yeah, so a conservatorship is, kind of think of it like a court-ordered power of attorney. So a power of attorney allows someone else to make decisions for you when you need them to do that or after you've asked them to do that. And a conservatorship is generally, if you don't have a power of attorney that you've prepared in advance, but you need someone to make decisions for you regarding your finances or your health care, someone can step in and ask the court to appoint them or someone else to make those decisions for someone who is unable to make those decisions for themselves.
Yeah, and that's really important, especially I think as families are planning for people that they love who can no longer make those choices. So personally, you have experience in this, and professionally, you have a lot of experience with families and older adults who are making these choices. What do you wish more people knew about money and aging?
So I think that the most important and kind of just a basic thing is to have conversations before they become necessary.
Yeah.
We tend to think of money as like this private thing that you don't talk about, money in politics.
Yeah.
And even if you don't necessarily want to share details with your family, letting them know what kinds of accounts you have and where they are, so that if they do end up serving as your attorney in fact under a power of attorney, or if they do end up if you end up under a conservatorship or within the probate arena, so that somebody has the information that they need to take care of things when you're not available to do it. And so that your family isn't struggling to locate assets, or so that you're not struggling to locate assets of a family member.
Yeah. So more transparency, it sounds like.
Absolutely.
What should a person in their 30s, 40s, 50s be thinking about in terms of money as they age or as their family members age?
Mm-hmm. It's really going to depend on your family situation and thinking about, so I am in my late 30s and I know that I will be caring for my parents and my in-laws. So thinking about, do I know what I need to take care of the other people that are important to me, as well as do I have things lined up? So for someone in their 30s, we're talking about making sure you're setting aside money for retirement, thinking about what do you need on an immediate basis, in terms of savings, and can you access it? If you couldn't access it, who would be able to access it? And start thinking about, especially if you have children, having wills, powers of attorney, nominations of guardians, looking at the assets that you have, who would be able to make decisions about them if you were unable to do so. I always tell clients, none of us is guaranteed tomorrow. And so just that applies to 38-year-olds as much as it does 88-year-olds. So just making sure that you know what that would look like. In your 40s, again, making sure that you have all the information you need to take care of the people around you, but also starting to more actively think about retirement. At 40, you're about 25 years away from receiving Medicare. So Medicare is the government healthcare benefit that you receive when you turn 65 generally, and there are several pieces of Medicare. There's A, B, C, and D. And so I would just, in your 40s, start familiarizing yourself with that. What are those different parts of Medicare? What is it used for? What does it not include? One of the big things is that it does not include long-term care. So thinking about what is your current health situation? What is your family health situation? So what medical conditions do your family members have that you may one day also face that could end up potentially needing long-term care? So particularly with dementia and memory care, cognitive needs.
Yeah.
That's one of the things that we see a lot, is that people don't necessarily have a plan, even though it may be something that runs in the family.
Right.
And planning for how would you pay for that care, or thinking about what do you need to do to create a plan.
Right. So not planning for a catastrophe, but instead carefully considering things that might happen and having a plan in place.
Right. So so we actually, in elder law, we consider it advanced planning or crisis planning. And you have a lot more flexibility when you're doing advanced planning than when you're doing crisis planning.
Yeah.
I mean, and that's for most of life too.
Right.
So, yeah. And then, in your 50s, it's the same. You're looking at, do you have what you need to care for the people around you? Do you have the information that you need? And then for yourself, you're a lot closer to Medicare looking at your health insurance options, looking at your medical situation, making sure that definitely reviewing your documents at this point. If you have children, they may be grown and out of the house. You'll probably want to update those documents. The documents themselves, they're not static. It's not like once and done. So you want to review those and make sure that they're still accurate. And just making sure that the retirement accounts are kind of where you want them to be. Do you have enough money going forward? Are they correctly allocated so you'll have the money to retire when you need it? Looking at how far out are you from needing to take minimum distributions, and kind of familiarizing yourself with what are the things that go along with retirement and what do you need to do once you get closer.
I mean, hearing all this, it sounds like this really ongoing conversation that you have with your family or kind of with your future self almost as you consider what aging might look like for yourself. And I imagine that it can feel overwhelming to get started on this. So what would you say to someone who hears all this and gets a little bit overwhelmed? What's one thing for someone to do today that could help plan for themselves or begin that advanced planning that you were talking about?
Yeah, so I actually love that you said your future self, because that's exactly how I answered this question. Is today you can think about what are your goals for your future self. Talk about it with your family, and then tomorrow start putting that plan in place. It's a process. Today, just state your goals. What do you want your future to look like? And then talk about it with your family.
Yeah, to have like a clear vision of where you want to go.
Exactly. Going back to, if you're doing the advanced planning, you're a lot more likely to have that come to bear than if you're crisis planning because you haven't actually put a plan in place. The more you do now, the less you'll need to do that.
What do you think the barrier to advanced planning is for people? Do you think it's just people are busy, or do you think there's an emotional component to it as well?
Yeah, so for a lot of people, it's fear. People are afraid to talk about death, and especially their own deaths. Their children will not talk about the death of their parent. Parents certainly will not talk about the potential that their children could pass before them. So sometimes having these conversations with your family, I remember being in law school and doing my estate planning class and being like, oh, wait, I'm over 18. I need to have an advanced directive. Mom and Dad, you need to know at what point I want the plug pulled. And they're like, oh, no, that's not going to happen. Trying to have that conversation with people who are not prepared for it and not willing to engage. And sometimes it's just people are afraid that having a plan will be expensive and working with an attorney will be expensive. And that's certainly a valid concern. But people have to look at the other side. Again, crisis planning is much more expensive than advanced planning. It's easier to do maintenance than it is to replace your house.
Yeah, but I do think that fear of maybe the overwhelm of the process, but also that fear of maybe if we don't talk about death, it won't happen.
Right.
Which, spoiler alert, not real.
It's coming for all of us.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I worked as a hospital chaplain. So we had a lot of these conversations as well, around people not having considered this, and then working with families who had really openly discussed this and honestly just had a lot more peace.
Yeah.
Because they knew they were doing what was wanted, or there wasn't as much crisis.
Yeah. And I find it's interesting because families that are dealing with some type of, who've gotten some kind of diagnosis and they've already had a chance to settle with it a little bit more, usually do. They have a lot more peace and they're just like, this is what's happening. Let's talk about it. When it is kind of real and in your face. And for everyone else, it's just one more thing to dread.
Yeah. And that's what I love having conversations around this about where family dynamics and money meet. I'm curious, we're talking about this fear that's coming up, but where else in your work do you see shame about talking about money or stigma around talking about money or assets or debt? Where do you see that in your work?
Yeah. And kind of like we addressed at the beginning, people have a lot of different stories. And it's not that one story is better or worse, but people tend to. So I actually do this questionnaire that I ask people to fill out, and it asks a lot of nosy questions. And I have reasons for asking these questions. It asks about your health situation, your medical situation. It asks about all of the assets that you have. And sometimes people tend to be like, oh, well, I only have a bank account and a car. Like they have failed in some way. It's just a matter of everybody's at a different point. But people feel like if they don't have a lot of financial resources, especially as they get older, that they failed in some way, which of course isn't the case. And there's a whole other side of ways in which society has failed our elders. People are making good choices with the resources that they have and spending them on things that have value to them. And so there's a lot of shame around just not having enough, even though there shouldn't be.
Yeah, so there's some self-judgment or maybe societal judgment or perceived societal judgment about what you should be left with or what you should be leaving to people or what you should have accumulated.
Right.
What other ways do kind of feelings around money show up in your work? I wonder, with your story, you were talking about family dynamics. Do you see different feelings show up in family dynamics or working with families? How do feelings show up in family dynamics?
Yeah, so with estate planning or with people who have lost a loved one, there is this perception around inheritance. And that shows up a lot earlier too in some places where somebody who is creating their documents, so writing their will, thinks that they need to leave something to their family and might make decisions based on that, or their family believes that they are entitled to an inheritance.
Yeah.
Or they very specifically don't want to leave things. That creates all kinds of my feelings and what I tell my clients. And sometimes it's, I'll tell people, I'm like, I may not be the right lawyer for you because I don't believe that anyone is entitled to an inheritance. Your money is yours, or your assets, whatever you have is yours to give away or spend as you feel is appropriate. You can give it to your family, you can give it to charities, you can spend it all before you leave here. But, we do have some people who just feel like they are entitled to an inheritance, or people who feel like they have to give it to their families. I'm fortunate to work with many families who they have good relationships. That's the natural course of how they would leave it. There's no conflicted feelings. But then you see these other families where those decisions can be difficult. And oftentimes we see other families, and sometimes this is part of estate planning or part of probate, where there has been financial abuse or perceived financial abuse of a loved one. And that can be really just heartbreaking. I think especially parents are usually very generous with their children. And sometimes it's hard to see where sometimes people take that too far. And sometimes it's a gray line of what constitutes what generosity and what constitutes abuse.
Yeah. Yeah. And in both of those scenarios, money is something different. Money equals love, or money equals success, or money equals power or control. It's not just money.
Right.
And so How do you talk to people about these things? How do you have these hard conversations with people about both planning, but also inheritances or what they should be planning for after they die or to give away to their families? Like, how do you have these conversations around things that are really tied up in self-worth and family dynamics and hoping to be a loving parent or somebody who provides a legacy? How do you think about these conversations?
Yeah. So I generally phrase this around and kind of frame it around that our lives are full of transitions. We're born, we grow into adulthood, we get a first job, we may have children, we retire, we at some point usually lose our parents or lose loved ones that are close to us. And at some point we die. And death is one of the transitions of life. And so we just have to plan for that for ourselves and for our loved ones, just like we do for getting that first job or having children or retiring. It's one of life's transitions, and transition is constant.
I love that.
Thank you.
I really do. That's so much more about creating a smooth road as opposed to ever arriving.
It's very much, I don't know, I think people see the finality of life in death, and it's, I don't know, I just think of it like, think of the ecosystem. Death gives life to other things, whether it's memories or think of like having a funeral or having a wake, and everyone gets together and maybe new relationships are formed. People share memories, people exchange pictures. While yes, it's definitely sad, that's generally not what we want to focus on. We want to focus on the good times that we had with that person. And so planning is part of how we focus on having room for that, for the positive interactions, but trying to take as many of the negative pieces away.
Yes, so that the focus can really remain on the memories and the relationship and the love that continues or the lessons that continue.
Right.
But with these hard conversations, it sounds like you really center yourself on focusing on the larger picture.
Yeah. I mean, our goal is to make this easy for the family. Even if my client has decided to disinherit everyone. Again, I tell people, your children are not entitled to an inheritance. Your grandchildren are not entitled to an inheritance. Legally, the only people entitled to an inheritance are your spouse and your minor children, at least in the state of Tennessee. So other than that, like I've told my own parents, I'm like, you spend it, like you go out enjoying.
Why is that important to you? Why would you tell your own parents that? Like, why does that feel important to you to say that to them?
Because I don't want them to feel like they need to save something for me. They have done their job as parents, and the money that they have saved. They have provided for all of my needs when I was a child, and when I was a fairly young adult, when I was in college, they made sure my needs were met. And on the whole, they've been generous with me and my brother, but what they've earned is theirs. And if they feel the need to leave us something, that's their decision, but I don't expect. And I think that's important because people will go to difficulties to provide for their children, just to leave something, and or to provide for their children while they are alive. And I'm not talking about their minor children, I'm talking about their adult children. And that's one of the things that I really struggle with when I see it. I understand those loving and affectionate relationships, but I also feel like it should be an equal partnership of providing and supporting in a parent-child relationship with both of them as fully matured adults, or that the child, if they want to, should be supporting the parent.
That, like you were saying about transitions, that maybe we don't do the best job in our society of having the transition from child to adult child and changing that relationship. Yeah. And also, I hear this like really kind of strong message from you of that I think is necessary of decoupling the idea that money is love. And so that by leaving money, you're leaving love, or that's how much you love your family.
Right.
Because
it's not.
Money might be a way to provide support and to show love, but it is not love. Love is love. And so leaving your family with a good example or a legacy or a sense of connection or just support emotionally when you were there, that might be way more important.
Yeah. So for me, I've always equated money with security. And parent responsible for making sure I was safe and secure as a child. But once I was an adult, that's not their responsibility anymore.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not their responsibility to make sure I feel secure.
You feel like you can do that now for yourself.
And I have a responsibility to.
Yeah.
Now, I recognize that security and money aren't always equal either.
Right.
But I think that we give money a lot of meaning it doesn't necessarily have. Ultimately, money is a tool.
Yeah.
To get the resources that we need. Whether that's food or clothing or therapy or medication or trip to the beach. Whatever we need, it's about figuring out how do we have the adequate resources to do that. And sometimes that's money. Sometimes it's something else.
Yeah. So I hear where you're at now, which is money as a tool, and maybe it's part of security, but it's also just one of our resources to get our needs met. So was that always how you felt about money, or what would you consider to be your money story, or how were you taught about money growing up?
Yeah, so my parents, I think, probably showed us and really taught us by example more than having explicit conversations with us, although they definitely had conversations in front of us.
Mm-hmm.
The only real rules about money were that you spend some, you save some, and you give some. So when we got our allowance or went to put money in the bank, that was the rule. My parents opened savings accounts for me and my brother when we were pretty young. I want to say like maybe 6 or 7. And I still have that savings account at that bank with my parents.
Wow.
And we basically treat it as like a family emergency account. Although I will put a caveat, I would not share a bank account with anyone that you didn't feel extremely comfortable with their financial situation. I worked for a creditor's law firm throughout law school, and those accounts can be levied. But so my dad is an engineer. He is retirement age, but is still working. And my mom, until 5th grade, she worked from home doing kind of odd jobs so that she could stay home with me and my brother. Once I went into middle school, she decided she was going to go back to school too. And so from the time I was in middle school until I graduated law school, someone in my family was always in college.
Yeah.
My mom was in college, or my dad was getting his master's, or my mom was getting her master's, or my brother had started college. Somebody was in school. And my parents had always made it very clear to us that they would help us, but that they expected us to work for the things that we wanted and needed. So, for example, they expected us to go to college, but they weren't going to pay for it. When I was a teenager, they bought me an inexpensive vehicle because I really wanted one. And actually, they needed me to have one because I went to a school without transportation. But the condition was that I had to pay for the gas and insurance. So I worked from the time I was 17. I knew that the transition to college was going to be difficult. And so I worked 2 jobs this summer before college so that I could take my freshman year off. I had a scholarship for tuition in college, but I still had to pay for my food and housing. And so I did take out student loans for that. Like most of us, I got my first credit card in college. I used it pretty responsibly, but I remember that at some point I maxed it out to the tune of like $300, and I paid that off shortly after I graduated. And after I graduated college, I moved back in with my parents. I didn't have a job yet. That was 2004. And I basically bought a car as soon as I had found a job and bought the car and started paying off my student loans. I've been very fortunate. And again, like I said, my parents have been very generous with me and my brother and have often made funds available to us so that we could do things in ways that were beneficial to us and them. So, for example, when I bought my first car, I borrowed the money from my parents at an interest rate that was lower than I would have gotten from the bank, but higher than they would have gotten in interest from the bank.
Interesting.
Yeah.
I hear in your story, like, it makes absolute sense, your focus on advanced planning, because it sounds like your family and maybe your personality set you up in a way to really think about things ahead of time, to know that you're going to go to college. So you have to think about it beforehand and plan for it. And I hear that through line of responsibility, of taking responsibility and using money as a way to make sure that you can access the things that you want to, but that it's your responsibility to do this with family support.
Yeah.
And I also hear, like, it makes sense to me that you work with families, because it sounds like your family really has a sense of mutuality, of let's figure this out together.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
As a system.
Yeah. I think it's typical parents who are like, we don't want our children to struggle the way we have.
Mm.
It's not like when we bought our house, it was the first time that we had heard the story of my parents saying, like when they bought their house, it was like 18% interest rate and they had to assume a loan and just had a very bare bones grocery budget and just this thread of frugality, which I remember growing up and hearing that story and seeing pictures and being like, we looked happy. Like, we didn't have any money, I guess, but we looked happy.
Yeah.
And then just going to school and then starting our own home buying process and being like, I can't even imagine an 18% loan for a house. But yeah, they've always been happy to share information with us when we've asked questions or help facilitate borrowing money when you've needed it. They've never co-signed a loan for me or anything like that. Again, fortunately, we've always had the financial resources for me to get what I've needed, and I set up credit relatively early and have had bank accounts and jobs and things like that.
Yeah. But I just hear that kind of family approach of like, they're going to support you and they're going to give you the tools that you need, but they're not going to give you everything that you possibly could want, and that it's your job to provide for yourself. So I'm curious if you had any strong emotions, whether that's like their, fear or shame or doubt, or really positive, kind of a deep knowing about when you started your own business. Because that's a big step. That's a huge thing to do.
It was terrifying. So I did. So I actually went to a program here in Nashville. I went to Nashville School of Law. And this was also one of the things that my parents had supported me in. I always knew I wanted to go to law school, but when I graduated from undergrad, I already had a student loan. I think it was like $15,000. It wasn't anything horrible. And I had been paying it off, but I knew I wanted to go to law school, but I also knew that I was 22 years old and $15,000 in debt, and I didn't want to be six figures in debt. So I went into the workforce. I went to National School of Law, which actually I took a few years off, and then I eventually went to National School of Law. I decided, let's be honest, at that point I had met my then boyfriend, now husband. He was in Nashville. My future in-laws were in Nashville. I realized I was going to stay in Nashville. There was no point in planning to go off to school.
Yeah.
So National School of Law is actually designed so that you can work and go to school at the same time. So I was working for the creditors practice, where I learned about garnishing wages and levying bank accounts. And some of the important financial information that I have regarding, what not to do. So I was working for the creditors' rights firm through law school, and I knew that I was underpaid, and they had increased my workload. They'd given me additional responsibilities because I was in law school and I could handle it.
Yeah.
And I knew more than the other people who had just joined the team. And I remember I had asked for a raise based on those increased responsibilities because I was stressed out over the new responsibilities. I was getting the brunt of the work. I was responsible for training new staff members on top of everything else I had to do. And so I asked for a raise based on that. And then I was eventually told that they could not give me a raise, but they understood I had applied for it because I had a lot of personal expenses coming up with the bar exam. And I was furious because I was like, that was not the reason for asking for the raise at all. I had managed my money pretty well during law school. Every time a gift came in for Christmas or something, it went into savings for summer school. But once I started preparing for the bar, they wanted me to apply for an attorney position. And I was like, if you're not paying me what I'm worth now, what are you going to try to pay me then?
Yeah.
And I knew that it would be similar in other places, going to work for someone else. And at that point, my husband and I had been married for like a month. But I was just so tired, mentally and emotionally. I was just tired of doing the work and not being compensated for it. And I was tired of not knowing what was around the corner or what, I was like, well, I could continue to work there. I could be an attorney there and work 80 hours a week and not make what I'm worth, or I could quit.
Yeah.
And start my own firm. And so that's basically what I did. We talked through it. I knew that I'd wanted to do estate planning. And we basically said, okay, we'll save up all of my paychecks from here on out. So basically we went ahead and became a one income family so that I could use my paychecks as seed money for, a new computer and printer and all the things I would need for the firm. And, my husband had a stable job and he could carry our health insurance and pay for our basic needs. Fortunately, I didn't have any loans from law school, and my student loans from undergrad were, I think, about 6 months from being paid off. They were almost gone. So it was terrifying, and I wasn't sure what would come next. I am pretty risk averse. And it was one of the hardest things I've ever done, but it was also one of the best things I've ever done.
Yeah, it takes a lot of risk to start your own business and to step out like that. But it sounds like it was really born of wanting to be able to plan your future and to value yourself and value your own work and worth.
Yeah, I was just, I was looking at being an attorney anywhere else would require those 80-hour weeks.
Mm-hmm.
And again, we had just gotten married after I'd spent 4 years working and going to school.
Yeah.
And I didn't mind doing the hard work, but I didn't want to be in an office where I couldn't see my husband or spend time with him.
Right. Just because like money is a resource, time is also a resource. And being in charge of your own time is sometimes invaluable.
Yeah. We were having a conversation about like, how much money do we need to live and pay our bills?
Yeah.
And we knew that we could cover that with his income. Once we knew that, it was a much easier decision, but it was still really hard because I'd worked since I was 17 for somebody else.
Right. It's a totally different mindset. You have to really change how you think about what work is and what it looks like.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I know you mentioned that you had this experience with your grandfather and then having that great experience and those memories with him, even as he's passing. And then it sounds like kind of all hell broke loose a little bit in your family. Is that what drew you to estate planning? Is that why you knew you wanted to do it?
Yeah. It was interesting because I was actually taking my estate planning class when he passed. And then, I mean, things kind of, you could see things going off the rail pretty quickly. So it was good to have have my professor as a resource and be able to say, like, hey, this situation, like, what do you think would happen?
Mm. Like a real-time case study.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. It was interesting. It was sad. But it also, the family members who have remained close, I think it's really brought them closer in some ways. So it's difficult. And I just, the thing is that it probably could have been prevented with some more education.
Yeah. So you saw the need there. You saw that by doing this advanced planning, by working with families, by being an ally and advocate for them, you could maybe help keep relationships. So when you think about how you value money or how you think about money, I've heard a lot around responsibility and security and using it as a tool. But what would you say your guiding values are when it comes to making financial decisions or having financial conversations are?
So I think really the key word there is value. When I'm looking at making a financial decision, or, like when my husband and I are thinking about, what do we want to spend our money on? What's going to improve our lives? Is it going to be the vacation or the dinner out? I don't mind spending money on things that are valuable to me, things that make my home more comfortable, things that help me make memories with people I care about. But, the things I don't care about have to give way for me to have access to more resources for the things I do.
Yeah. So really prioritizing and thinking, how will this impact my life?
Yeah. And my priorities are not the same as other people's priorities. And that's a good thing. Honestly, that's part of our economy. So
what do you wish that you knew 20 years ago about finances, business, and the emotions that surrounded them?
Mm-hmm. So I wish, so my husband and I mean, we've definitely merged our kind of styles over the past 7 years, but we now use a software called YNAB. You Need a Budget.
Yeah.
Yes. I wish that 20 years ago when I was 18, I had invested in YNAB. It's interesting because my husband he's not bad with money. I want to clarify that first. But he has other strengths, and I am actually the better money manager. And when we got married and I quit my job, one of the other things that I probably would wish I had known, or wish I had, had some kind of training or therapy around, is like emotional equality.
Yeah.
Because when we got married and I quit my job and I wasn't bringing in any significant income, I felt like my job was to spend as little money as possible and to account for every dollar that I had spent rather than being an equal partner in our relationship. I felt like because he was making the money, I should let him manage it.
Yeah. And that's really common, especially if you grew up working and are used to bringing in money and are used to saying like, okay, this is what I can contribute.
Yeah. And it's really interesting because that wasn't, like, looking back, I don't really necessarily know why I felt that way. Maybe just because I had always controlled my own money, and I probably would have felt a little controlling had the shoe been on the other foot. But, my mom stayed at home and she was the money manager. So I don't know. It was just weird.
Yeah, it was a new role. And I think it's really hard for couples to kind of adjust to that change oftentimes.
Yeah, it's definitely been an adjustment. YNAB has been great at helping us kind of stay on the same page, making sure that all of our expenses are accounted for in advance the way I like.
Yeah. And it's nice to have a third party tool, it sounds like, that makes you both be clear about your goals and your spending.
Yes. And it was great because my husband, I was kind of like, let's put something in writing. Let's get a budget written down. Because I had done this, I guess, from the time I got my first apartment, looking at what my resources were. And he was kind of more of the bills are paid, there's no problem.
Yeah.
And he didn't necessarily need anything written down. It was in his head, and I needed something on paper.
Right.
And he was right. The bills were paid. It wasn't a problem. But I couldn't see what was in his head. And when I showed him YNAB and I was like, hey, here's a fun gadget, then he was on board.
Yeah, it worked for both of you. Yeah, because it's like a fun game.
Yeah. Yeah.
And you do it every day and it gives you a little red notification. And yeah, no, I'm with you. I do it too. So just to end, I want to do our final 5 lightning round. And it's just kind of fun questions just about you and money. So
okay.
What do you love spending money on?
So fancy foods from either the local vendors or the grocery store.
Do you have a specialty? I'm like a cheese plate girl, like I can put together.
So we actually purchased the Bloomy Ryan's cheese subscription.
Yeah. Good cheese. Okay. I like it.
It's one of those things where I'm like, I'm not eating out, so I can spend money on nice things.
Love it.
I'm saving money by not eating out. So I get to spend all the money I'm saving on fancy groceries.
Yep. That's me and my nice wine.
Yep.
What do you hate spending money on?
Fees. Like shipping costs, the styling fee for Stitch Fix, the $5 click list, the 3% fee to use my credit card online. I'm like, I understand why people have to charge fees. I know. And I know that it's worth my time to just pay it, but they bug me.
Yeah. If you had $1,000 to give away or to spend on others, like if I gave you $1,000 and said you can't spend it on yourself, what would you do with it or what would you support?
This one's really tough because there are so many good causes, but I would probably spend it on some type of early childhood education because I think I have so many things that society gets wrong. But I think leveling the playing field among children as early as we can do a whole lot to help remedy that.
Yeah. What is the hardest choice or the biggest mistake you have had to make around money?
So I'm sure I've made big mistakes. I just don't know that any of them have been like super horrible.
Okay.
The hardest choice was probably buying our house. Because, like I said, I'm risk averse. And we were buying our house in 2016. We were looking in the price range where you could not buy anything. People were buying houses sight unseen.
Wow.
And that was like my number where I was like, okay, if we buy in this price range, our mortgage will be this. We can put this down payment. We can still save X number of dollars a month. Like that was I had the plan, but housing prices were continuing to go up.
Yeah.
And I knew that we couldn't, like, the longer we waited, the less our money would be worth. And so we ended up, like, we bought a house one tier up in price range. And everything has been fine. We love our house, but...
Yeah, but it's nerve-wracking. It's a lot of money. It's a huge purchase.
It is.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I was, like, I just remember, like, fighting with the realtor, like, the house is not worth that. And it wasn't worth, like, I still don't think our house was worth when we paid what we paid for it. It's worth a lot more now. So it was okay.
I know. I remember writing a check just to get my first car, and like my hand could not stop shaking, at the bank. Yeah. I was like, oh my gosh, what? But yeah, it's big purchases like that. Very hard choices.
Yeah.
Okay. So last question. So what is one thing that you would do if you won the lottery? Or I know, you're not a huge into inheritances, but if you had this crazy windfall, what's like one kind of wild dream that you would do with it?
Okay. The like not practical at all.
Yes.
I have a list of answers that are like completely, like I'm going to pay off the house and I'm going to fully fund all of our true expenses. But I would take 6-month vacation. I just tour like everywhere.
Where's one place particularly you really want to go once we can go places again?
Right?
Yeah.
I don't know. I definitely don't want to go to Italy, but I would want to go to Italy.
Yeah. That checks out with the good cheese. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, like I just want to eat cheese and drink wine and bread. Just give me all the carbs.
Yeah, so a 6-month sabbatical kind of vacation. That's awesome.
Yeah.
That is a dream. That time and that experience would be meaningful. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, I so appreciate your time and thank you so much for being here. I learned so much. I hope that the audience will too. And I just really appreciate your time.
Of course. Thanks so much for having me. This is fun.